Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing The Power by Naomi Alderman. I'll talk very briefly about the author, go into a spoiler-free overview of the plot, talk about what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off with what I'll be reading for next time. This is Naomi Alderman's fourth novel. She has been writing for quite a while now, actually, and she won some awards and accolades for this novel. It was the winner of Bailey's Women's Prize for Fiction. It also, I think, was made some end-of-year list. She is from England, and she, I think, was made a professor of writing relatively early on in her career and was on several best writers under 40 lists. And so this is a relatively well-known book. This is still, I think, the best known of her stuff, and is about, it's a novel. It has kind of a novel within a novel structure, and the novel within the novel is about a world where women have, roughly analogous to contemporary society, have had a what they call the skein. So it's a part of their body that grants them access to powers. So essentially, the ability to most of the way it exhibits itself is the ability to shock people. And so they can use these shocking powers as weapons, and really what happens to society as a result of this over roughly a 10-year time period. And we kind of bounce back and forth between a few different characters. There is the daughter of I would say, mid-level crime boss in England. There is a mayor in an unnamed city in the United States, and her daughter, who is also kind of dealing with the development of these powers. There is a journalist, the only, I think, one of very few, I think he's the only one of two male POV characters, is a journalist who is from Nigeria, and he basically is able to see these different outcomes of this change in society as his position as a journalist. And there's also a woman who becomes something of a messianic figure in America. She kind of leaves a pretty brutal past and starts up what is essentially a new religion based on the idea that the God is female, and that this is really her sign that women are the only or most powerful beings. And so it was a cool idea. I really enjoyed the idea. I thought it was neat. I think there's some nice little subtleties in the book, the book is really excuse me, it's about a few different things. One of them is the shift in power, really ultimately the question is, what do people do with power, and does power almost always necessitate an erosion of social norms and niceties? And in this book it does. But I think there are some subtle points in the book that she makes. I thought that some of these side characters especially were quite interesting. There are some really funny moments in the book that kind of lighten a little bit of the mood. It's a pretty brutal book, and I'll talk about that a little bit in the who I'd recommend the book to section. But there are some points of levity in the book, and I enjoyed, like I said, I did enjoy some of the side characters, specifically the daughter of the mayor. She begins the book as the daughter of the mayor. I enjoyed that character quite a bit. I really liked that character's kind of weird. She felt very authentic to being kind of this teenager who's already kind of strange, and then she has this power that she doesn't know how to really control. And I really liked how Naomi handled that character. And so just kind of the idea that women have gotten this power, and how does it shake up society, and what happens to the social norms of the world and the balance of power between men and women and gender roles and all that stuff. I thought that just in general was a really cool idea. Some of the con sides, some of the things I didn't like as much, there were some things that I think she could have cut. There's a point where there's kind of an explanation given for the powers in a way that reminded me a little bit of Why the Last Man, in the sense that in that novel, or that graphic novel, people often ask, why did the men die? And there's several different explanations given. And I think Naomi Alderman, if she had just kind of excised the chapter where they explain why that happens. I think the book would have been probably a little bit better because it doesn't matter. And I'll talk a little bit about that when I get to, again, what this book reminded me of and who I'd recommend it for. I also thought that the chapter within, or the book within a book, the book is kind of framed as a fictional version of a world where, I'm trying to think of a way to explain this without spoiling things. There's a framing device, and I'll just leave it there. There's a framing device that is kind of, I thought, extraneous, and I think you could have cut that, and you wouldn't have really missed it. There's some little social, the whole book, there's a lot of social commentary, but that part especially, I think there's some social commentary related to publishing, especially, and how the book ends, that I think was a mixed bag. I could have probably done without it, and I think that the book would have been better served if there had been more on the kind of social changes in the day-to-day lives of most people. The book does cover some hot spots in the world. We see what happens in Saudi Arabia. We see what happens. There's a kind of a breakaway country in Moldova that because of this. I would have liked to have seen more what was the average person's life like after this change. And there are little bits and pieces of it here and there, but I really would have liked to have seen, suburban America, what would happen in England. And so some of that happened, some of that is in the book, but it's not quite clear how large and how vast these changes are. Have birth rates plummeted? Is divorce rate changed? Like some things like that I think would have better served the book, and those things I felt were kind of missing. Also, if you're someone who really requires likable main characters, this may be a difficult book for you because almost everybody in the book, in one way or another, is unlikable. So if that's something that's a prerequisite for you liking a book, this may be a no-go for you. There's one or two points in the book where there's some what felt a little bit like lazy stereotypes. She doesn't dwell on them for too long, but there's one or two points where I was just like, I think this is a pretty good writer. I wish she had maybe tried a little harder with this minor character here. But other than that, I enjoyed it. The book I enjoyed for the most part. I will say this is a pretty hard R book, and as far as things that may upset people, there are sexual assaults that are relatively graphic. There's a lot of violence. There's some things that I just found to be some scenes that are written specifically to be like distasteful and upsetting. And so if you're someone who is bothered by or off-put by those things, then it may be a hard book for you. The book that it reminded me of is Tom Peretta's The Leftovers. So if you like that book, this reminded me very much of that. I don't think there's an explanation for what happens in that book given, and I think she would have been better served to have gone that route. The book has a very heavy influence of Margaret Atwood, who blurbed the book, and the book I've read in some interviews is really kind of based around Margaret Atwood and the relationship with the author is heavily inspired by their friendship. And you can definitely see if Margaret Atwood wrote something like The Leftovers, you would have something like this book. The book is, in my opinion, it's very, very cynical, and, take that for what it's worth, and I'd be interested to see how other people reacted to the book. I enjoyed it, and I think that there's some really good, nice work as far as some of the social commentary and stuff that I enjoyed. But at the end of the day, the book is like deeply, deeply cynical, and that kind of led into the issue I had with some of the main characters. Some of the character motivations at times were a little iffy, and there's some plot holes in the book that you just kind of have to get over. There wasn't anything major that took me out of the book, and I actually read it relatively quickly. But I would recommend it to Margaret Atwood fans. And if you are a fan of Margaret Atwood and you haven't checked out my review of Stone Mattress, I'll leave that below. But if you're a fan of that book or The Leftovers, I think you'll enjoy this. Just know that it is very, very hard. It's a pretty hard R book. I mean, it's pretty gruesome in some points. There are parts where it's implied that children are harmed in other parts. So if you don't like any of those things, there's scenes of torture. So just be forewarned if that's something that is not what you want to be reading. Just a heads up there. Overall, I did enjoy the book. I thought it was well done, and I have read some of the criticisms, and I thought some of the criticisms were valid, especially in terms of what I said. It would have been nice more to see kind of the day-to-day and maybe areas where the person reading this would be maybe more familiar. But yeah, that's the book. Until next time, I'm going to be reading This Is How you lose the time war. Please, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button if you've enjoyed this, and I'll leave my Twitter link below as well. Till next time, bye.